Today I'm speaking with Shayne Mechen. Shayne, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having us on.
And today, Shayne is joining me from all the way in New Zealand, which is crazy how many different time zones I've been hitting with people I'm talking to, which is just a privilege. But Shayne lives in the town of Palmerston North on the North Island of New Zealand. And before I go on with your bio, could you tell us what is it like living on the North Island of New Zealand?
What is it like living on the North Island, New Zealand? Well, New Zealand's not a very big place. And I know Palmerston North gets a big thumbs down, and they sort of make it the joke of the place because there's not really much here, but we're pretty central. It takes about 6 hours to get to Auckland, which is the biggest city. We're 2 hours approximately from the capital, which is Wellington. But yeah, everything's pretty central. We're pretty close to most things, and I love it.
Hmm. Do you ever get to go to the kind of more naturey parts that we all saw in Lord of the Rings and things like that?
Lord of the Rings. Believe it or not, I was driving up to Auckland and there was a film crew on what we call the Desert Road, which is by the mountain regions. And I found out as we were driving past, because my companion, she said, yeah, that's where the Lord of the Rings have been filmed.
Hmm.
So that is about 2.5 hours from where I live. Nature, we don't have to go too far for nature. Like I'm 20 minutes from the sea. If I go up the other direction, 15 minutes from the ranges.
Hmm.
And we can just walk around. So wherever we go, anybody in New Zealand, most people can get to not so much the sea, but nature, half an hour. We're there. Most people can get to the sea about an hour and a half, 2 hours max, say in the middle of the South Island. We're all surrounded by water, obviously, which is handy for COVID because we can keep it out as a rule. And no, it's great.
That's awesome. Very cool. I'm a little
Yeah, it
bit
is.
jealous. New Zealand is on my bucket list for sure.
Well, if you come here, you're going to have to meet up.
Absolutely. I'd love to. Well, I'd love to just hear a little bit more about what you do. Is it correct? You clean carpets?
Yeah, I've
And
been doing that for a little while now.
and as much as that is obviously a job description, we're going to go into later about how that's a little bit of a joke
Yep.
or a cliche, I should say. But before we get into that, could you tell us a little bit more about yourself and like any hobbies you have?
Well, now that I've got a lot more time from being out of the organization I was brought up in, I can basically, one of the hobbies I've started doing this year is going places around New Zealand. You know, we travel all over the place. So that's a bit of a hobby now. And I take a little bit of footage to show my friends overseas.
Hmm,
I enjoy doing a bit of video work, you know, putting animations on videos, and
that's
you
awesome.
never know, that might become a skill one day where I can make it my business and go and live anywhere as soon as the internet's available and do these things from the beach.
Yeah, that'd be awesome.
That'd be fun.
That's the dream.
Yep.
So we will get into the carpet cleaner part of this, but that brings up the whole reason we're chatting today, which is to talk about your background, your
Yeah.
experience. So you grew up as a Jehovah's Witness. So just to
Mm-hmm.
put that out there, so for a context for everybody. But could you take us before we talk anywhere near about your, what happened over the years as
Yep.
you began to, kind of think through it all? But what was it like growing up as a JW?
I thought it was normal.
Hmm.
I didn't know anything about anything when I look back. You know, my parents, they were both witnesses. I was a third generation witness. My kids are fourth generation. Well, one of them still is, one's out. But yeah, it was just normal. You know, we didn't celebrate birthdays and the kids were around us and they would
Hmm.
celebrate birthdays and they'll laugh at me. How do you feel not celebrating birthdays? I said, well, it's just another day.
Hmm.
Um,
You mentioned
yeah.
excuse me. You mentioned three generations. Do you know what your family history was before JW?
Well, I know my grandfather was drunkard. He wouldn't have been a witness. My grandmother, when she became a witness, they weren't together. So my grandmother was the first of the family that, as far as I know, was a witness back in it was around the late 50s, early 60s.
So you grew up as a Jehovah's Witness.
Mhm.
I'm just curious, when you were younger, what were some of the main messages that you remember from the earliest days? Like what kind of things would you sing about or hear about in your stories?
Um, Paradise. I remember my dad saying, look, don't worry about school. You're not even going to school. I remember, I was only 4 or 5. You're not going to go to school.
Was that because you thought
1975 and Armageddon.
Because you thought Jehovah's was
Armageddon.
coming back?
Yep, going to come back, bring, by means of his son Jesus, he was going to bring, fight this big battle. Earth was going to be destroyed, and paradise was going to happen. So yeah, no need to get an education at all.
Interesting. I'm just curious, for baseline, when you say paradise, I know that I'm a little bit aware from some of my background and from some of the recent conversations I've had with other people, but could you just fill us in? What is the difference for a Jehovah's Witness about heaven, up in space or up in the sky, so to speak, versus the paradise on earth? Who gets to go where, and how many? I know there's 144,000 in the top heaven, I think, but how do they view that? And was there a sense that you were going to go up to heaven, or was it always that you would just be on earth?
I'd just be here on the earth. When those ones who say they're going to heaven, they just say, I feel that's where I'm going. When I was in, the figure was around the 8,000 mark. Now it's around the 20,000 mark. So if it was all going to come to an end, why is the number going up? And the more and more I do, or critically think more to the point, I go, that just doesn't make sense.
The 8,000 and the 20,000 are people that the church said we know where they're going there?
Yeah, they said that. They, 8,000. So the number in theory, listening to the J-Dub, should be that it would go down because we were getting close to the time of the great day of this battle of Armageddon, and that would be the start of being able to transform the earth. And that's where I was looking forward to it at the time. It's going to be paradise. I'm going to have my pet squirrel. We don't have squirrels here in New Zealand, because there's one book back, it was printed in 1968. It's a pink book, and there was a picture, and I'd always look at it. It had a little squirrel, and we were promised, we'll be able to have a panda and a big tiger, and all these sorts of things as pets. Be around them, enjoy the company, and there'd be bears beside lambs and wolves beside lambs, and even snakes there running around kids. They wouldn't get bitten. So that's what, as I grew up, I was always told that this is what's going to happen. Obviously, I know differently now, but yeah, that's how I grew up.
So your parents were JWs, obviously. And what was it like in terms of you're going to church? How many times a week would you all go?
Well, we had 5 meetings. 2 of them were on the Tuesday, 2 of them were on the Thursday. No, sorry, 1 on the Thursday and 2 on the Sunday. So there was the one that was on the Thursday, in most cases, was a book study. We'd go to a house, and my father, he was an elder. He would take the study. I remember one funny story. He couldn't get the book study group to keep quiet, and I said out loud, "Order in the court, the monkey wants to talk." And my father looked at me, but there was quite a laugh in the room. On the Saturday, on the Sunday, we had a public talk and a watchtower. Most people will have heard of the Watchtower magazine, and we would sit there answering the questions which were in or part of the paragraph. The Tuesday night, we had something which has benefited me in my life, a thing called a theocratic ministry school, where the brilliant trainers, I'll give Watchtower that, they are brilliant trainers on how to speak at the doors, which has helped me in my business. I'm not scared to go and approach anybody and say, hey, would you like? And that was the training I got from that, knocking on the doors. And then the service meeting, which was the second part on the Tuesday, was to do with the field service, which meant the door knocking work where we'd try and indoctrinate people to become witnesses.
So you were seeing your parents do the witnessing from a very early age then?
Yep.
How early in your life do you remember kind of going with them? Were you with them as a young toddler, as a baby? Did they just take you with them? And
I was there from day one.
Okay.
My first meeting was 4 days old. My father used to go out most weekends, so I don't know when I first went from the doors, but I know I was pretty young. I've seen photographs of myself at the conventions. I would have been 18 months old, and the conventions yearly, so they are, differed over the period of time from 8 days down to basically 1 and 3 days now, when they have them over the internet.
With going to church 5 times a week, what would have happened if your family had said we only want to go 3 times a week? Would they have been discouraged and kind of ostracized for not obeying, or how does that work?
Yeah, you can miss the odd meeting, but if you started to do it on an ongoing amount of time, if you were an elder and you started doing that, your qualifications would be brought into question. You might be removed as an elder. If you were a pioneer, which is one who spends X amount of hours knocking on doors, and you stopped going as often as you should, you would be brought up in front of the elders. You'd be chatted to. So yeah, it was part of life. Jehovah's Witnesses isn't just a fancy thing. It's life. Everything revolves around the J-dubs and what they do.
I'm curious, when you look at that, it sounds from an outsider's perspective like obviously they want you to be exposed to their teaching, but was there a side to it where they're also trying to keep you busy enough that you just don't have time to be with the world, with the pagans, so to speak? Or was it more just about indoctrination and getting deeper and deeper in the word?
Well, it's a lot of training, basically.
Okay.
If you don't know how to go and talk to people at the doors, they're not doing that at the moment, then how are you going to spread the good news? So it was control, because the parts that they were given, like one of the claims they used to boast about, and I guess they still do, is that now it's 8.3 or 4 million, that everybody on a Sunday will study the same magazine, the same information, and nobody else could claim that fact. And so it was one of those things where you just go, okay, it's wonderful. We've got a brotherhood that's studying the same information, and yeah, I think differently now, but it was definitely a controlled indoctrination thing that carries on to this day.
That's amazing. Would you say that, though, as much as we're obviously describing it in somewhat negative terms now, when you were growing up, was that a good experience? Did you feel like at the time, knowing only what you knew then, that this was great? You were getting so much, conversation about God and hopefully prayer with God. Did it feel like it was a good experience at that age?
Well, that's all I knew. So as far as I knew, yeah, it was great. We were the chosen religion. We've got all this information coming down from God. We've got the hope of paradise. Who wouldn't want that to get rid of the problems in the world? So yeah, definitely it was something that all I knew, and yeah, it felt good.
You mentioned the phrase "the good news." I think you said the gospel. What for a Jehovah's Witness? What does that mean? And knowing what you know now, do you know how it would differ from, say, a Baptist or a Presbyterian perspective, or certainly a Catholic perspective? Like, what did it mean, and how would you compare and contrast it now?
The good news of God's kingdom was all about the kingdom that was coming. It was something that was good news to get rid of the bad state of the world. And I remember looking at different things, and they would constantly focus on the negative, how bad the world is and how bad the famine is. Yeah, it's bad, but that's all they ever really focused on, just to re-emphasize the aspect of some good news of God's kingdom coming. As regards to comparing it to others, I really have no interest in it now, and I don't know if I could compare it to it.
Gotcha.
I never thought I would say that, but yeah, it's just, I don't know.
Well, I do want to dive into that compare and contrast a little bit in a minute, but I want to make sure I kind of flesh out the ideas you're presenting. So, a Jehovah's Witness would say that the gospel is that there is a kingdom coming that's going to be initiated when Jesus comes down from heaven. Is that correct? So you would not be seeing Jehovah face to face. You would be seeing Jesus, but he would.
Not really seeing Jesus.
Okay.
But we would see the signs from what we were taught from the Bible.
Was he
And
going to
that's,
literally like rain, not raindrops, but reign as a king from
yeah,
Jerusalem or from somewhere on earth, or what was it going to look like?
out in space, in the heavens, wherever that might be, that's where he was going to reign, overseeing Earth, along with the 144,000.
Hmm. What would life be like? Like, how would it be different once he started reigning? Would it just be
Well,
like all the sinners would be in prison, or would they just die right away from sinning, or would sin just be gone,
no, they'll be annihilated.
annihilated? Okay.
They wouldn't be there. Um, the whole idea is once Jesus was going to start ruling, they would be gone. We'd be cleaning it all up. So getting rid of all those dead bodies and different things. The buildings that were, when you look at the pictures in their publications, the buildings would be smashed down, and you'd have to go along with the diggers and bulldoze them and start rejuvenating the earth under his direction.
And would the Jehovah's Witnesses that had obviously not been annihilated, would they be in some kind of glorified, perfected state, or would there still be a sin issue at that point? Like, could you still accidentally talk back to your elders, or
Oh, yeah, you could do all that. They talk about it, like I'll give you an example of their logic and their thinking. So if somebody had an arm missing, it had been cut, gone, then it would slowly grow back. And so our sins would also slowly disappear into the future, and we'd become perfect. In the past, and we'd become perfect as we were going forward.
Interesting. I've never understood that part of it. That's really fascinating. So there's no hell. I know this, just to repeat it, for anyone that's new to Jehovah's Witnesses. There was no burning hell, like no place where you just are in eternal conscious torment. You are just, if you're not on Jehovah's side,
You're
then
gone.
at some point when you die or when he returns to reign from space, you're gone.
You're gone.
Did that ever, like, I'm sure you did at some point hear about the hellfire message
Oh
that
yeah,
a
we
typical Protestant.
never stopped talking about hellfire, but it was from the perspective that the fire outside one of the cities was to burn rubbish. It was
Okay.
never tormenting like some of the Islamic sort of religions where you can see. I always remember a picture. I was fascinated by these pictures of all this fire floating around, these guys with a fork. And I used to sit there, we're looking at these pictures. So yeah, we knew it was there, but we were told it was false. It was a false teaching. It was something that even more fascinated me. Oh, if I could be there, I'd do that. And I could get the fork. That's how I remember as a kid doing. But we were told, no, it's all false. So for me, I didn't ever worry about it because it was false. It was something that wasn't in the Bible, and I didn't have to worry about it.
It strikes me because it makes me think kind of the whole carrot and stick issue where, like, if someone says, if you decide not to be on Jehovah's side, the worst that can happen to you is X. And if that X is you just disappear. Well, that's sad if the alternative was you'll disappear or you'll go to someplace glorious. But if the worst is, I just don't exist anymore, that might be sad, but it's not horrifying.
Yeah,
But if someone said, if you don't believe, you will literally be tortured and burnt forever, and
yep,
it'll never stop. Not like in a billion, zillion, trillion years. This will never stop. You will burn forever. That's like that's this ultimate. If heaven's the ultimate carrot, that's the ultimate stick. That'll get you. As they say, the sinner's in the hands of an angry God. Put the fear of God into you. You got to understand this is so much at stake here. You can't get this wrong. You have to avoid hell at all costs.
yeah.
Yes, you need to be right with God, but
Mm-hmm.
beyond what you get from God in terms of the gloriousness of it, there's also a punishment that you desperately need to be aware of
Yeah,
and take seriously and escape. And it sounds like that's very different for a Jehovah's Witness. It's very interesting to hear that difference.
yeah. The carrot for J-Dub for most of them is the paradise earth.
Hmm.
Most of them don't want to go to heaven. And they use the viewpoint of Jesus that when he woke one of the persons up, he resurrected them. He basically said they were sleeping. And most Jehovah's Witnesses feel that's what it's like. They're dead, yes, but they're sleeping, waiting for the resurrection.
Mm.
So that's one of the carrots. So in paradise, those resurrected ones will come back. And if you go to their, not that I'd encourage you to do that, because you might be shocked at the indoctrination for all side of things. They really push a fantasy that these ones are going to be resurrected and the families all going to come back and surround them and hug them and have a great time. Now that's all very well and nice, but that's a carrot for the J-dubs. Most of them, the carrot is not heaven.
So who gets to go? Who are the 144,000? How do they get into that special group? Is that just like the ultra people that just love God more than everybody else does?
No, they think they are part of it. And so at the memorial once a year when they celebrate it, which is usually around the Easter time, those ones who partake of the wine is a symbol that those are the ones who feel they are going to heaven. But apart from that, there's nothing outward that would indicate these are special God-minded individuals that deserve to go there.
Is there any preaching or encouragement to aspire to get there?
Okay. Totally the opposite. Paradise. So anybody
really?
Anybody who they talk to, whether it's at the moment it's through letters, through telephone calls, because nowhere in the world are they doing the door-to-door work, they will always push the hope of a paradise earth, which they take from Psalms 37.
So is going to heaven then considered a lesser reward?
No, it's just one that is very few in number.
Okay.
So there's 8.5 million, say. Now, those ones who have been alive in the years gone past, that 144,000, if you sit down and do the mathematics on it, they're well over 144,000. So
yeah,
how they know, even the leadership, what they call the governing body, they say they're going there. And the governing body members is looking forward to seeing the humans burn like hot dogs. And he proudly said that on their broadcasting. So how they know? It comes to them by the Spirit, apparently. And then they go, yep, that's where I'm going.
And for the people, for the people in paradise, will they have families and like will there be more children eventually, or is it like whoever's goes into paradise, like you just become kind of like an angel at that point?
Well, no, there's no angels for those ones in paradise. Depending on what period of time in the J-dub theology will depend on that answer.
Okay.
Like there will be a time when all but 8.5 million people, so wipe out the 8 billion people, however many we've got on the earth at the moment, leave 8.5 million people. They will then have children. While they're cleaning up, they'll have...
So paradise will be increasingly populated.
Yep.
With only people that are following Jehovah.
Yep. And they'll also, those ones who have died, they'll be resurrected back into that environment until about the 1,000-year mark, because Christ rules is going to be for 1,000 years. And then there's going to be another almighty upheaval because these people will have turned out like they are now. And the earth will be getting back with rowdy people. When you have a look at the pictures, that's what it looks like, that they try and symbolize it as. And then one final battle, and then all those ones there that are alive, apparently they're deserving of being there because those are the definite ones that Jehovah wants in his paradise earth.
And that final war is Armageddon? Is that correct?
No, Armageddon's before that. No, this is another war. This is the war. I can't remember the name, to be honest. I used to know it all. But yeah, it's one final battle and that's it. Then the earth will be constant in paradise. They even talk about those ones who've been resurrected, say if a wife or a husband dearly loved and I know some who dearly love their spouse, they're not allowed to get remarried.
Hmm.
There's some talk of crazy stuff like there's going to be just men.
Did you say just
Yeah,
men?
just men.
Like
You
no
know,
women in paradise?
well, I'm not going to have babies. There's all sorts of crazy things when I think back to it, and
Hmm.
it keeps changing. So how you meant to understand what the policy is or belief is now versus say 5, 10, 15 years ago, that's your guess. It's as good as my guess.
Interesting. Interesting.
Mm.
Well, take us back a little bit to your time growing up. Did
Yep.
you like what would you have done as a say as a young teenager? Say between 10 and 15, where if you weren't in church and being told what to do, hey, go to this meeting, go to that meeting, go witnessing. If you're
Yep.
just, by yourself, you're in your quietness of your own heart, and you're just trying to be close to God. What would that look like? Did you do just a lot of Bible reading, or what would it look like for a young man to be close to God?
I think I did a lot of Bible reading around 10. I would have done more as I got into, say, 13, 14. I got baptized at 15 with what I had read and what I thought was right. That's what I did.
Is it an
Um,
immersion or a sprinkling?
no, immersion, total immersion.
Okay.
And they'll go so far as if you even pop your knee up, they will dunk you back down again. So you've got to be totally immersed. It didn't happen to me. I think now they just hold the knees down when it happens, so they don't have to. Okay, but you go to school, you would have acquaintances at school. I say acquaintances because you could never build up a real friendship. In fact,
Hmm.
I know when I was at school, there was a lot of bullying. They knew I was a Jehovah's Witness, and I was proud of that. But of course, that came, oh, you're that, and I'd get spat at and hit at and all sorts of things. And
Hmm.
I was a shorty, and they would terrorize me. And so you never really had friends. And
Hmm.
even if you did have friends, they'd have to stay at school. You wouldn't go and see them.
Yeah.
Like I loved sport when I was at school. But I was only allowed to play sport midweek after school as long as it wasn't on a meeting night.
Hmm.
So no sport on a Saturday. We were knocking on doors. But when I did have free time, like in school holidays, I'd go fishing.
Hmm.
I'd go down to the wharf and go fishing for a lot of the time.
That's awesome. So for your friends that weren't Jehovah's Witnesses at school,
Mm-hmm.
were you encouraged to actively try to talk to them and open doors to tell them about
Oh, yeah.
Jehovah? Okay.
Yeah. I remember one example. It was primary school here in New Zealand. I would have been in standard 4, so maybe about 10. No, yeah, it would have been 10, 11, somewhere there. There was an example in a publication where they said one of the students over, I can't remember the country, would put out little tract. Now, a tract is something that you may have seen being handed out. It's only a small thing, 4 pages folded over, and I'd left it out on my desk. And I thought, that'd be a great way to be able to, I might be able to witness to somebody and get to talk to them. And no, that didn't work. All I got was more grief.
Hmm.
But that's what I expected, because I was always told that Jehovah's people were going to be persecuted. So if I was being persecuted, it was going to be a great sign that I had the true religion.
Yeah, it's a badge of
And
honor.
being a good little J-dub boy, doing everything my parents told me and everything that was in the publications, that's what I did.
Hmm.
And I didn't think anything of it. I just thought it was normal.
Did you ever
So
see, like when you were out going door to door, did you ever see any of those conversations become fruitful in the sense that people said, I would like to actually come to your church and I would like to be considered following Jehovah. Did that kind of conversation ever happen?
it does occasionally, I found. But it's a lot of hard work.
Hmm.
When I say a lot of hard work, we would go back. We called it return visits. So we would go back on the same people that we might have placed a watchtower and a Wake magazine with, or had a good Bible discussion, and we'd knock on the door. But they'd never be home at the appropriate time that was arranged.
Hmm.
Well, I shouldn't say never. Some people were. But there was a lot of hours doing exercise, walking around, knocking on doors.
I have to ask, do you think that some of those people that weren't around when you'd scheduled to see them were intentionally out at that time because they didn't want to have the conversation?
Your guess is as good as mine, but I'm now looking back on it, I would say they didn't really want to be there.
Mm-hmm.
And we would catch them off guard by knocking on their door, whatever other day we went and got there, and we'd continue on the conversation. And I think a lot of people were too embarrassed to say, look, I'm not interested. They were just being polite. Yeah.
It's interesting. From my background, I grew up more in a Baptistic background.
Yep.
And there's a verse somewhere in the New Testament that talks about people that preach another gospel, to not even let them, I think something about don't even let them in your house. And from the earliest days, Jehovah's Witnesses and Mormons were certainly, and more Jehovah's Witnesses, obviously, because of the witnessing, they were more considered in that group as almost as if that verse were written for JWs, like to say, look, these are the clearly the people God was warning us against. Don't let them in your house, like physically, like it's almost like it's sin. Don't let them cross the threshold. And it was really interesting to see that dynamic of almost like not a fear, but just like a sense of the devil is speaking through the Jehovah's Witnesses. These are really, this is a fringe cult. Don't even, like, it's not even worth touching it. They're so brainwashed. Don't touch them.
Yeah, well, I didn't know all about that.
Yeah, I was going to ask you what you about that. What did, as you grew to learn other denominations, what was that like? Like once you learned the Baptists were very different from you and the Presbyterians, were you like, wow, that they're all not going to be saved, or did you think some of them might be saved?
No, they weren't Jehovah's Witnesses. We had the truth. We believed things that the Bible said, and those other religions did not.
Okay. So it's kind of the same in reverse, that we were the ones that were preaching the false gospel.
Yeah.
Can I ask, can I dig in on the gospel for a second? The gospel for a Protestant would be very, very specific. It'd be very, very clear as well. It would be basically the glorious gospel that starting with the bad news, you have a sin issue. You are, number one, you inherit original sin. You're in Adam, so you're condemned before the party even starts, before you even are born. You're born in sin, but then you add to it with your active sins, and of course sins of omission. You do things that offend God, and you fail to do things that God requires. So you're just like triply condemned here. You're in a deep pit. But it's worse than that. God describes it in the Bible as if, and this is all from a Protestant evangelical perspective, but just describing it for anyone that's more from a Jehovah's Witness perspective that might watch this and need to see a difference. But it's very specifically saying, those of you who, or once you realize where you're at before God, meaning you're dead in your sins, this isn't a situation where you need to work harder. This is a situation where you need to see yourself as unable to work. You can't become more righteous. You can't do more things. It's like, instead of saying you're drowning in the ocean, God sent me a life raft, you're not drowning. You are the corpse at the bottom of the ocean that can't respond. You can't grab the life raft even if it's in front of you. You need God to literally give you life, and that's where it starts to merge towards Calvinism a little bit, where you say God has to go to you and choose to give you enough, to enlighten you so that you can in fact respond. You do bring your sin, but then He has to wake you up, so to speak, so that you admit yes, I'm so needy, I'm so wicked before God. And then this is where the gospel begins to kind of flesh out that Christ, by dying on the cross, was in His pure righteousness as a spotless Lamb of God. He was taking all the sins that we had committed, and they were basically being put on Him as our penal substitute, that He was taking our punishment in His place, and that when He died, He paid the full penalty. And then when He rose again, He proved that He had power over death and had conquered death. And that basically that was the gospel, is that your sin issue is only resolved and can only be resolved by you not trying, but realizing that Christ alone has been your perfect substitute. He is the one that gives atonement. And that by basically saying the prayer, saying, God, please, I accept this, please apply the righteousness of Christ to me, so that when you, God, the perfect, white, hot, holy God, see me,
Yeah.
now instead of seeing me as a sinner, you see me as in Christ, therefore Christ's righteousness covers me.
Mhm.
So when I'm in Christ, I am in fact righteous before God, judicially, even though I'm still imperfect here on this earth. And that gospel is your hope that you once you stand in Christ, you're sealed for the day of redemption. God has finished the problem. The problem is over forever. That's the gospel. Therefore, the preachment is, will you please turn from your sins to the righteousness of Christ and accept it as his
Mhm.
free gift? That gospel sounds a little different from
Mhm.
the Jehovah's Witnesses gospel. Is that fair to say that that's not what they would have said is what the gospel is?
Parts of it, yeah, they would have said. Not that they give any guarantee. Jesus died for them, but there's no guarantee that you're going to be good enough to get through.
Okay.
There is a bit of a life raft that if somebody who's not a JW can reach out for the life raft and hang on to it, bring them into God's organization, and there's a far better chance.
Okay.
But yeah, there's no guarantee. They say it quite clearly that not everyone who is a Jehovah's Witness is going to be saved.
Okay. Does that kind of strike the fear of God into some people to get more serious about it?
Yeah, it does.
Hmm.
I hear stories all the time now. I never had them, but so many young people as they were growing up were petrified that
Hmm.
they were going to lose their family, that they were not going to get to paradise, that they, yeah, it's emotional blackmail. It's abuse,
Hmm.
and these
Sounds like it.
kids.
So you're never really what we would have called secure. You're never really.
No.
You can't just say I know that I'm saved. It's the story has been written. God has written my story. I'm in the Lamb's Book of Life. I
Yep.
know that I am right with God. You can't have that level of certainty for JW.
Well, you sort of can if you go and die and you were a faithful Jehovah's Witness.
Okay.
But for those ones who are alive, there's no guarantee.
I mean, you could still technically fall away in some way.
Yeah.
Okay. Gotcha.
And it doesn't matter what Jesus did. Like you
Hmm.
said, it says he was saved for all mankind, but not for a JW.
So what part does works play in it? Like for a Protestant person, it's the big
Mm.
message is grace alone, through faith alone, through Christ alone. There's no works. If you bring works to it, if you say God, if God said, "Why should I let you into heaven?" and you say, "Well, I was pretty good. I obeyed your commandments," it's like wrong answer.
Yep.
This is not has nothing to do with you. This has to be Christ alone covering you. And if you try to cover yourself, you are messing it up. You're clearly telling God,
Mm-hmm.
I don't want your pure gospel. I don't want Christ righteous. I want Christ plus a little bit of me. And so
Yep.
they would say, if you really want to be saved, you have to get rid of yourself, die to yourself and let Christ be your covering. It sounds like, and so therefore the idea would be don't try to do a work salvation. You do need to work once you are saved to show everybody, hey, look what God has done in my life. But if you're trying to work to become saved, to become right with God, you're missing the point. You miss the gospel. You're still on your way to hell. It sounds like the works part of it is a little bit more important for a JW. Is that fair to say?
Yep, definitely. We, as a JW, we had to go out
Hmm.
and knocking on the doors.
How did
We
you know
had,
when it was enough?
what do you mean?
Like if you went out
Yep.
3 times a week and someone
Mm-hmm.
else went out 10 times a week, like
Mm-hmm.
how did you know when it was sufficient to say, now I'm pleasing God?
Well, the elders in the congregation, they will look at individuals and try and get you to aim for 10 hours a month. So going out each weekend, do a couple of hours, try and get around the 10-hour mark a month to be able to prove that you are doing what a witness should be doing.
Hmm.
Now it's down to as low as 15 minutes, believe it or not. And they can count you as an active witness. But the more you do, the better off you are in the eyes of a witness.
Hmm.
So works also meant going to the meetings, preparing for those meetings. If you had a family, having a family Bible study to instruct the family, and the head of the house, the husband, or if there was no husband, the wife was encouraged strongly to make sure once a week they sat down and they did a family study using their publications and their thinking.
Kind of like a
But yeah,
church at home.
yeah, definitely. Yep.
In terms of your, just going back to your childhood, do you remember times when you would pray, and did it feel real to you? Like, did you feel like you could sense God's presence at all?
No, I never felt that. It was just something that we did, something they encouraged, but I never really felt it.
Did you ever hear about or even see something you would have put in the category of possibly miraculous?
We heard stories because watched how the Jehovah's Witnesses would put them in the publication of experiences. This person did this, they prayed for this, and this happened, and all sorts of things. Myself, I never really saw it. I can't think of an occasion that I could say, yep, that was God. I just never saw it.
Interesting.
I never thought anything about it until after I left the J-Dubs. But while I was in there, I firmly believed that that was what we should be doing. And yeah, I can't honestly say I never saw anything that would show the benefit of prayer in regards to what a lot of people say.
Yeah, I would say ditto as a Protestant evangelical Christian. I didn't escape till I was 43 years old, but if you discount the first few years as a young child, round it to down to 40 years. In 40 years, I occasionally would hear people say something like, "I have seen the power of God. I know He's real." But in terms of seeing something that I would say there's no way that you can't explain that, I never saw anything, not even close to something like that. It just, you'd occasionally, of course, as a Christian, you would chalk stuff up to it where you'd just be like, okay, that couple was about to get a divorce, and they looked, like they're just the, cantankerous couple ever, most cantankerous couple ever, and they're clearly headed to divorce court. And a year later, you'd see them, loving each other and being nice to each other. And of course, you as a Christian, you'd attribute that's the power of God. Or of course, anytime there was some kind of medical advancement, like there was as a young child, I remember, same name as me, Timothy, this young boy named Timothy who was like a preemie, and they thought he wouldn't survive. And as far as I know, he's done great. I think he's probably a healthy young man at this point. But like every year was like, it's a miracle he's still alive. It's a miracle he's still alive. But in terms of, you you can attribute that to medical advances, to really good doctors and medicines and equipment. But to something where you'd say there's no way, there's no explanation except God intervened in a supernatural way, and this is if you want proof, I've got this. I don't have one of them, not a single one. And the other ironic thing is that while I'm on that note, I remember thinking too, just the generic, like the low level power of God to just transform people's hearts and minds slowly. One of the most difficult things for me was I knew people who had been in the Word for decades, who were grumpy people. I was like, you've been in church, twice, 3 times a week. You've listened to Christian radio, and every morning at breakfast, every night after dinner, you're listening to, basically 4 or 5 sermons a week effectively, and reading your Bible every night. And you're some of the meanest, grumpiest people I've ever met. And just is like, where is the power here?
Yeah, totally agree. That's what I've seen too.
Well, looking at the specific of the church, I'd love to hear about, to dive into some of the church dynamics. What was the leadership like? I assume it sounds like it was a patriarchal group, correct? All men leading the church?
Yeah, women are told to be submissive. Get there, don't rock the boat. They use examples in the Bible of women who are submissive, but yeah, it's definitely men. At the present point in time, and this has changed over the years, at the present point in time, the congregations have a Kobe, which is the guy, it's a glorified mailman, really. All the mail goes to him. He hands out the different responsibilities that need to be done within the congregation. They have a service overseer, and that's to do with the door knocking work, making sure the territory covered. They have a secretary. He does all the letter writing and all a lot more in behind scenes stuff. And if there's other elders, they're involved. So there's no one set number for every congregation, because some of them have so many males that some of them are sitting there twiddling their thumbs. They're not doing anything at all.
But it's always men pretty much
Always
doing.
been. Yep.
Yeah.
A woman would not get on the platform unless they had another woman beside them, either doing a demonstration to demonstrate how to do door knocking work, or to do a theocratic ministry school part, which was a conversation between the two individual and training them how to speak at the doors. Apart from that, there was the only thing they could really do was answer at their meetings. When a question was raised, they would be able to raise their hand and answer, or do the cleaning.
And so
that's the role of the woman in there.
So the preachers were always men. The men that expounded the word of God were okay.
Yep.
And I'm just curious, with the hierarchy of the organization, was it kind of like, you know how for Muslims, it's like kind of a ideal to go to Mecca, or certainly I'm sure for Jews to go to Jerusalem. Was it an ideal to get to New York at some point and see the headquarters, or is that like an irrelevant issue for JWs?
No, it's not really an issue. Like here in New Zealand, we sort of can't get on a plane and do that a lot. I'd always wanted to, because I'd seen videos, they'd release videos of what happened at Bethel and around the headquarters and the farms, and I want to see that. And then in around 2009, I actually got there. Not that I was an active JW, because I'd got to the stage I had sort of had enough, but I'm still glad I went, even to this day. You know, it was something that's part of my history. Now they've moved it away from New York City and gone into further away with all their other facilities that they're building. But they do encourage us to go to the Bethels. Yeah, we don't have one in New Zealand now. The closest is Australia.
What is a Bethel for anyone that doesn't know?
Bethel, we call it, is where all the stuff for the house of God around Australia, New Zealand is looked after. And they used to do printing and all that sort of thing in those places. And so you'd go and visit and see what it was like, see what the powerhouse of God's organization here on the earth was really like. They must be such happy people in there. I've got to get there and get some of that spirit to rub off on me and be upbuilt by the association of the brotherhood.
So it's kind of a mountaintop experience if you get to serve there a little bit.
Well, I always wanted to.
Did you? So you didn't ever do it?
No, I never got there. Okay. And looking back, I'm glad I never did. But yeah.
I was curious, going back to the elders. What does the elders book mean?
The elders book. So you want to know what the elders book is all about?
Yes, I want the secrets. I want the magic power.
Okay, so this is their latest one.
Okay.
It is called Shepherd the Flock of God. Now, all the secrets, they talk about them being secret. A lot of it is actually already in their own publications. Okay. Some of it isn't, some of it is letters. So this publication has the references to where the information can be found in their publications, if they haven't changed it. Not that a woman's not allowed to touch this book.
Not even allowed to touch it.
Not, see how this is bound? All right, so what it comes in is it's not bound like this, but they are allowed to get it bound as long as this is how crazy it is. If a woman is the only one that is around to bind this book, the elder has to stand over her so she doesn't do this.
So they don't want women looking at it, period.
Oh, no. And a lot of witnesses do not know this book exists.
And is it correct to say that's a book that's focused on church polity, how to run?
Policy. So anything from how to look after one of their buildings, to vandalism of the building, to child sex abuse. within that organization. Anything from small to large, how a person should be acting, are they listening to the wrong music, what can we do, is there a need for a court, what they call a judicial meeting to come up, so the internal kangaroo court, the steps that they're meant to follow. I used to pull it out when I was in an elders meeting. Mine was a hard-covered one when I was an elder. And I'd leave it sitting there and just have it so that nobody could see, and just go, right, point 1, point 2, point 3, point 4, point 4. So everything is in that publication, and at the moment, around every 6 to 8 months, they go and change it and they produce another one. Obviously, they're not printing a lot now, but it's all digital. So, but yeah, they will change it. They'll upgrade it, supposedly.
Well, can I dive into that just for a little bit? I know there's a lot there that is probably more just nitty gritty, like you say, of how to run the church that's not relevant to this conversation. But the one thing that you touched on that I wanted to get to as well is the idea of abuse. What would it look like for a church, picking one of the kind of stories that we all hear about that we are horrified about, but say, there is somebody in the church, say a man who has abused a young underage girl, say a 13-year-old girl, done something that would, in the broad scope of society, probably easily warrant a call to the police, and courts and so forth. That kind of situation, say, rumors start, he's done something he shouldn't have, and for whatever reason, it was perhaps hushed up, but it's now come to the attention of the elders, and the elders now have a choice of what to do with it. What would that book say, and what would the church culture say now that we know what supposedly has happened here? What's the next step? What would they typically say, do you think?
Okay, so the procedure is, and I know this firsthand, they will ask the individual who's making the allegation, was there another witness? As in, did somebody see the event that takes place? If they said no, that is the end of the subject. They take the scriptural very literally, where it talks about 2 or 3 witnesses. So
even though knowing most of those situations would be a private, it'd be a dark room where you wouldn't want witnesses, they would still not allow it to be a discussion.
Absolutely. So if there's no witnesses, the 2 elders who have come to investigate and ask questions, if that's what they found out, maybe they did find out who they alleged to happen, they would go and see that individual and say, okay, so there's an allegation about you molesting such and such. What do you say? If he said, no, don't know about it, they have to drop it, because their policy from the Shepherd the Flock of God book, this one here, says they can't do anything unless there's 2 witnesses. So the reason they take 2 elders to that person to ask if he did it is, if he admits to it, they now have 2 witnesses.
Yeah.
So they can then proceed. The book says if there is a case, you need to ring the service department. The service department will then give direction. And in a Watchtower magazine, do I have it here?
The service department doesn't mean the police, and that just means a department of the church leadership.
Oh, that's right.
Okay.
This one here. This is the, what have we got? 2019 May study edition of the Watchtower. And in that publication, they clearly state that they endeavor to go to the police when it is required. Here in New Zealand, there is no law that requires them to go to the police. Now, if it happens to get, you're talking about the gossip, the old grapevine, it gets around the congregation, they will shut that down. They will have a thing called the local needs talk, and encourage people not to gossip. Now, if say it was the mother of an underage child, starts talking about this child abuse and saying, did you know such and such had abused my daughter? The elders will step in and will say, stop slandering. If you don't stop, we will take the next step, which means remove them as one of Jehovah's Witnesses. Now, as an elder, I thought I knew the policies. I didn't know the policies. Whether I would have done what they said, I don't know, because it never happened. I never dealt with child abuse. What I do know in Ireland, though, is when elders went to the police, they were removed from their position. They control it. They shut it down. And even when somebody goes to court and take Watchtower to court, we do not know how many millions of dollars Watchtower has paid out since the 50s when they brought about their child abuse policies, how many millions they have paid out from donated funds to shut individuals up and get them to sign a non-disclosure agreement. We know it's happened thousands and thousands and thousands of times, which J-dubs do not know happens. They all believe their current wording when it says we abhor child sex abuse. They don't know that it's going on in such a horrific manner. Even in their own magazines, they'll go, you need to look after your family. We wouldn't stop that. But their actions, totally different.
And so this protection of the person that's the perpetrator, where if there's not a second witness, you can't do anything about it. That would include even people that are in some kind of leadership position, or even would you call him a pastor?
Elders. They call elders.
Even an elder could be accused of this, and if there wasn't a second witness, they keep preaching or serving like usual.
You've got it.
Interesting.
And there's been plenty of elders who have done it. The only upside of that whole thing is if, and it never used to be the case, if there was another young person come forward alleging that the same person had done something to them, there's your two witnesses. They can then investigate further. But until that point, these guys will threaten, will blackmail, will do whatever. What I know now about that organization, just evil.
For sure. It sounds a little bit like, it makes you wonder. It's almost like it's similar to the way the mafia, controls things. And like, if you cross us, you will regret it, and you'll deeply regret it, and it won't really stop. You're going to pay for this dearly. That kind of mentality from a church that supposedly their message is one of the, in a sense, I would think, the love of God, is more than a little ironic. It's scary to think that they would basically be betraying their own message, in a sense. I would hope that they would see it that way, that we're betraying the very heart of our gospel, the love of God. And it strikes me too that the whole idea, it sounds very much set up against women. I'm sure you'd agree with this, but how many women are there that we hear in the news, on a weekly basis, even, where we hear these horrible stories where they say this happened to me, and the group that they were in, or even the larger society that they were in, even in America here, people basically get off free all the time because of the way that either the courts work or the structures. But you'd think, okay, in the yes, the courts of the pagans, the courts of the world are going to be broken. Of course, they don't have God, but the courts of God, the church, is where justice should be, preserved. And certainly from the sense of just saying, the Bible talks about the bride of Christ, the church, being something that he wants to present spotless and pure. And in a sense, there's this philosophy of like, the purity of the church is so beautiful, and yet it's a picture of a bride, and of a young girl with her groom to be, and yet you have all these girls who probably do value, that personal purity, and do
Yep.
want to be a spotless person for their future husband, so to speak, and yet they're in a spot where if they get violated, they know that more likely than not, unless most people aren't going to have a second witness on this, more likely
Mm-hmm.
than not, they have absolutely no power to do anything except let it go,
Yep.
even if it's as horrible as a rape or worse. Like that, they have no power in this case, in the
They
very
don't.
church of Jehovah.
Mm-hmm. They don't. It's unspeakable as to the treatment of women.
Hmm.
Okay, we're not saying that rape and abuse is happening from every JW male or female,
Sure.
but the culture in that place when it comes to this sort of thing is just diabolically disgusting. If their God is a God of love, why does he allow that organization? We know humans will be humans and they do nasty things. Surely a God of love in an organization that claims to serve the happy God Jehovah, one that allowed his son to come down, why is he not concerned about the members who are worshiping him?
Yeah.
Where's the true love coming from the example of the supreme being?
And especially when you're adding in the idea of this, we talked before about small children. I mean, if
Yeah.
anything, like, doesn't God care about his small children? And I was speaking with Sherry Souza about this, but there was a big report in Australia years
Mm-hmm.
ago, and the abuses that came out were, I mean, I think the right word here would be rampant. Like there was extensive, endless stories, and it's
Yeah.
like you get this picture of, yes, there's certainly, I'm sure, some churches where it's not happening, where they're just nice people that
Yeah.
take care of each other, and that's great. But you've got this structure in this system that's basically like it's set up to protect predators.
Pedophiles.
Yeah, pedophiles and predators. It's like if you protect these people, they're gonna come. They're gonna come. They're gonna do their worst when they get the chance. And I know we're spending a lot of time on this, and I'll wrap this part up soon. But it just, do you feel like, as you're obviously out, but do you feel like, from what you know of the conversations within the church, that there's any kind of wave or sense of people saying, we have to change this culture? This, even if we're going to stay as Jehovah's Witnesses, this has to change. Do you ever get a sense like that, or is it just like
You ever heard of
status
the
quo?
term a mill pond?
A what?
A mill pond?
I don't think so.
Okay, so it's a flat pond with no waves, no nothing. That's Jehovah's Witnesses,
Okay.
because they take the spin that Jehovah's organization, Jehovah's Witnesses, abhor child sex abuse. Yeah,
Hmm.
they know it's going to happen, but it's only such a small problem, and we don't have to worry about it. So the one thing they do protect these perpetrators, these alleged pedophiles, is if they are dealt with in the congregation, they will make an announcement that such and such is no longer a Jehovah's Witness. They are not told in the congregation that there is a problem.
Hmm.
So there is no wave of wanting to change. Yes, there's a wave outside when it comes to former Jehovah's Witnesses like myself. I was never abused in any way, not child sex abuse anyway. But there's so many thousands upon thousands around the world that this organization has ruined their lives. All they need to do is go, Mr. Policeman, come here, please. And they refuse to do that because that's bringing in Satan's world
Hmm.
into that organization. And yet they will get me to report spray painting on a Kingdom Hall, which I've still got the photos. Which is more important, the kids, the ones who have abused, or their buildings? Well, it's their buildings that is way more important. That's where the money is. Now, I know Jehovah's Witnesses, if they stumble upon this, they go, oh, no, that's not true. I'd encourage them to think. Yes, I know you're encouraged not to go to the internet because that's Satan's world. Type in Jehovah's Witnesses and see what comes up. Yes, your webpage will come there, Jehovah's Witnesses, Those reports are not made up apostate lies. They are court documents. They are newspaper articles. They are actual facts. They have been abused, and it's not just one or two.
And is it, just to dive into this a little bit more, and then we'll wrap this part up.
Yep.
Is it correct to say that the disfellowshipping side of it? So you could have theoretically a young girl who has been abused, and there's only there's no other witnesses besides herself. So there's no way that the church will move forward with any accusation if she doesn't have the bigger context to herself go to the police. She's expecting the church to address this. She tells her parents, whatever, tells somebody in the leadership.
Yep.
And let's say that the person that did this was in fact an elder.
Yep.
And so she is encouraged now, and her parents are encouraged to let it go. There's only one witness. We can't proceed. There's nothing to talk about here. At that point, if she proceeds to say, no, this was a horrific crime, I need you all to do something, is it correct to say that if she doesn't stop discussing it, that eventually she would literally get kicked out of the church, meaning disfellowshipped, and they would kind of, in a sense, be adding insult to injury by basically, at first she was the victim, but now they're going to make her out to be the really bad person because she's disrupting the peace of the church.
Yep, slander. Okay, there is a little rider to this whole thing. And they have occasionally said this, but they do not make it a major point. In the magazine I showed you before, it says that an individual can go to the police. So they are allowed to do that, but because of them knowing that the elders are God's leaders here in the local congregations, if they say to an individual, look, leave it in Jehovah's hands, it'll be fine, he'll look after it, he'll get it sorted. They leave it in the elders' hands. Nothing gets done. If anybody's ever had, and they are watching this, regardless of what religion you're part of, go to the police, let them know. They're not agents of Satan. They are there for our benefit, to help and protect and hold those ones accountable. The elders have and will continue to disfellowship those ones that cause unrest in the congregation because of supposed slander or because there's no two witnesses. Mums really surprised me in that organization. I know of so many here in New Zealand that they will not go to the police because the elders, even though their publication says they can go, the elders really say, look, leave it in Jehovah's hand. We don't really want to bring it upon a bad thing upon Jehovah's name. And they just sit back and they don't go to the police. And so the elders are judging that poor young person with a life sentence and not being able to get the support to be able to handle the triggers that they're going to have for the rest of their life.
It's hard to even imagine just the depths of what that culture and that subculture would be. Just it's hard to wrap my mind around. I would have been as a Christian, but certainly as from where I am now, it's just the idea of not protecting the ones that are dearest to you because of the it's basically it's like a reputation thing. Like, as long as, even if it's something bad happened, if everyone thinks we're doing okay, that's what matters. No matter what's behind the scenes. Like, don't look behind the curtain. Don't mind the man turning the dials. Just keep your eyes on Oz and let him tell you what to do. It's crazy.
It is totally crazy.
When you talked about the internet. So Jehovah's Witnesses are strongly discouraged from doing any kind of looking or digging. Is that correct to say?
Well, there's a problem with that. In 2014, they started up their own webpage. So at one time, there was an article that says, our calculators, one of these little devices, are they a tool from Satan? And in their own publication, they would go, oh, you've got to be very careful with that because it will lead you astray. And they really, for many, 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 many years, when the internet came along and the forums that were out there where you could start finding out facts and details, they would, oh, look, brothers, don't go there because it's all Satan's lies. And you just don't know what the truth is when it comes to a subject. And even in a recent broadcast, a video they made, they said the same thing. They've not got off it. And yet, thankfully, they have put J-Dub on the internet, because what is happening is people, while they're sitting in their kingdom halls or on their Zoom meetings, which they are doing now, they are looking up all sorts of things and typing in Google Jehovah's Witnesses. And then they'll come across a page like jdubfacts.com. They'll come across a page, avoid jdub.org. And they will find out things they did not know. Even though they are pushed as a point of apostate, bad information, you don't go near that. They strongly discourage finding their old publications, which, by the way, has some crazy, crazy stuff. It's almost you wonder if they're on LSD or something. That's how crazy it is.
So they don't want you to look up stuff that they put out a decade ago or whatever?
Oh, no. No, I've got some publications that are back in the 1800s. I'm not going to go and read them, but it's just, I took, it's part of my history. So I've got a selection of older publications, but no, they use the term that we've got new light. So anything that they've updated, we've had an inspiration and we have now bright light, and this is what the truth is. And they will, all the stuff there, it gets pushed further and further, so that the current witnesses will not know it even existed. And they encourage Jehovah's Witnesses to, look, you don't need those older publications. You've got everything online. You've got an online library. And they're either selling them on eBay, or they're burning them, or they're putting them in the recycle. So they're getting rid of all their, and yeah, when I think back what I was brought up with, yeah, they're crazy. And I did not know it.
It sounds, yes. Well, let's get into that. That was kind of the main point where we wanted to make sure we touched on is what happened in your story. You obviously were deeply in this. You were witnessing. You were a believer. You're doing your Bible studies. You're going to church 5 times a week. What was your journey like from past the teenage years that we got up to before? How deep did you get into it, and then what started to change?
Yeah. Okay. So I got baptized at 15. I basically went door knocking from school because I didn't need an education. I was going to be getting into paradise where, we don't need to have an education to be in paradise. And so for about 5 years, from the age of 15, it might have been 6 years, age of 15 to 22, I would either spend 60 or 90 hours knocking on doors in a particular month. During that time, I became what you call a ministerial servant, which was not an elder, but it was a helper to the elders. I was used in a number of different ways. We were more like an elder because we didn't have that many elders in that congregation.
Were you interested in becoming an elder?
Oh, yeah. Well, I was a J-Dub male, and J-Dub males go, right, we want to do this, sort of set out for us. We start here and we go, and so, yeah, I served as a ministerial servant for about 6 years. Latter part of that period of time, I was giving public talks as a ministerial servant. I was doing meeting parts. I was running theocratic ministry school, doing the territory under the instructions of the elders. And then I became an elder, and different roles than being an elder, whether it was the presiding overseer, which is what they call a Kobe now, whether it was a secretary, the service overseer, whether it was watchtower study conductor, book study conductor. I took all those roles. There was a time where I was all three of the service committee. We had to get others to come in. It was during that time where I was the only one there. The elders meetings were very short, though. I will say that. Some elders meetings would go on for hours. But yeah, no, I just talked to other elders and went, yep, right, that's done. Okay, that's decided. End of elders meeting. So that was quite good. But during that time, I just got sick and tired of it. I wasn't happy. I was going through the emotions. I wasn't happy one bit, even though you have a smile on your face. It's just go through the motions. I always thought I was doing what I should be doing.
Can I ask
Following
about
up.
that? Was it that you were tired of the church business, or tired of like talking about God? Because like I know some people talk about I'm tired of religion. I want to focus on my relationship with God. Where they're tired of all the meetings, but they're certainly not tired of God. They're aware that it's like the meetings were almost like a distraction from the passionate drive that we have for God. Was it like that, or was it more like you were just tired of the whole thing, including God?
Everything.
Everything.
I was just going through the motions.
That had to
How
be
dare
scary when you said that to yourself.
Well, all the way through, being out for so long now, I realize I've had doubts since I was around 10, 11. We were at a district convention and I stood up and I said something to my father. And he goes, come on, Shayne, let's talk about that at home. We don't have to worry about that. I never followed up on it. And all the other doubts that I had over the years, I never kept questioning. We were encouraged not to question. We were encouraged to go to the Bible and read and pray more and do more study and things like that. And I did in their own publications. So I never really got into an environment where, it might be something from, I don't know, some person that's quite famous. I never checked it up. I never continued to ask questions. I just would get over it and carry on doing what I thought an elder should be doing. And it wouldn't be very good for an elder to start doing these wacky things. And so I just kept going. I look back and totally numb. I really had no feeling. Yes, I felt I had to do the duty. And it got to the stage where, whatever, things happen in life. And in the end, when they happened, I stepped down from being an elder. Yes, the elders talked to me. I was so unhappy and depressed. It was ridiculous. I'd never been like that. I'm usually a pretty positive person. And you sit there and you just shake your head with what you now remember what it was like. And you just go, oh, I'm so glad I'm not there. Yeah, there were times when I thought I would go back for my children because I love them dearly. Can't speak to them. Well, especially once they turn 18. I could go and see them, have lunch, have tea with them at 18, not legal age. And so during that time, I was able, even though I wasn't a JW after I wrote my disassociation letter, I would spend time with my kids. I'd give their mother, because one thing with JW marriages, unlike Sherry, where her and her husband who managed to get out together are so lovely and sweet. Most marriages, forget it. If they find out that one, whether it's the wife or the husband, is no longer a believer, you can almost guarantee, it's not always the case, but almost guarantee that that marriage is going to split up because you no longer believe in Jehovah. Marriages in that organization, like I said earlier when we were talking, to get to know a person, a woman, I was never encouraged to hold hands with her. Oh, no, you can't do that. That might lead you astray. But you're chaperoned all the time. Most
During
ones who
courtship,
get
you
in,
mean?
during courtship, Usually it would last 8, 9 months, 12 months, something like that. It's pretty quick. You never get to know the person. You get married to this person. Hell, you don't even know them when you're married to them. And as you go on in life, you start drifting apart, because apart from the J-dub stuff, that's where you're focusing your energy. And once that's gone out of your life, what is there to keep you together? Nothing. And so, yeah, it's funny, because there was a time when my son really had a lot to do with me. He said, I'll never let them do anything, Dad, to stop us from talking. He's not talking. The reason is the elders used my words against him, emotionally said to him, look, where's your loyalty? Are you loyal to Jehovah? Or have you got more loyalty to your dad? And they gave him quite a hard time. He told me that that's what they had said when we were talking. And they think it's normal. They think it's right. They don't know any different.
So you
expectation.
You have 2 kids, or you
Yep.
said one of them is not a Jehovah's Witness?
One of them is not. The only way I was able to assist her, she had to make the decision, was she started asking questions. And it was funny. She went down to Gore. While she was Jade up, she ended up in a relationship. She had a baby, great kid. Her mum then went down to where she was living, mentioned to the elders that her daughter was baptized. She now has a kid. She's not married. Right, she's disfellowshipped. She moved back up to the North Island. She went very quiet for a long period of time. We would talk occasionally. Then I found out she went back to the J-dubs. And she discovered, after doing all the work to get reinstated, so once you're disfellowshipped, yes, you can go back. You've got to be reinstated. Depending on what you do in the way of sins or wrongdoings, depends on the length of time it takes to become a J-dub again. She went back and she told me, Dad, there's no love there. They don't care for me. And that made her start thinking and asking questions. It was funny, because she rang me up and she said, Dad, she was baptized then, or back as a J-dub. Dad, can we go out for lunch? And I thought, okay, yeah, sure. So we went out. I took her on a little job, which was about half an hour. We had lunch, and then I dropped off, and I'm going, there's no questions. What's going on? Because in my head, I was going, okay, she's going to try and get me back. Okay, right. I get there, dropped her off at home, and she goes, Dad, I want to ask you some questions. And I said, you're not going to like my answers, so I'd rather not. And she said, oh, okay. About 6 weeks later, I get a postcard. Remember the time when you go for work, Dad, overseas, and you'd send us a postcard? And I texted her, and I said, what's the postcard for? Never heard back. And then 6 weeks later, I get a friend request on Facebook, and I'm going, what is going on with this girl? Because they shouldn't be touching base with me if they're a witness. So I knocked on the door. Well, actually, I sat outside the house for 3 hours in the cold. It was winter. And I thought, oh, she's not coming home. So anyway, I went home, had some dinner. And I thought, right, I'm going to go back around. I parked outside the house, texted her and said, you home? She goes, yep. And then I knocked on the door. About 3.5 hours later, she was ready to sign her disassociation letter. And that was all because the question she was going to ask was, why did you leave? Because both her and my son had the view, as J-dubs sort of indoctrinate people, that even the strong ones, so if you appear to be strong, they'll say even the strong ones will fade away. And so, yeah, we talked and talked and talked. And because my first comment was, well, you're really not going to like my answers. She goes, I don't care. I need to know. And I told her the facts of some of the things that were like the IRS tax documents. So they weren't made up by some apostate person, even though they claimed they are. Some of the things that happened in the congregation we were in. So these things I knew were factual. And she goes, And yeah, a few days later, she stood in my office and she goes, "Dad, it's like my whole belief structure's gone. What now?" Same thing as I experienced. You just don't believe it that this organization is totally the opposite. Or I should say, no, the people are nice. There's some great, lovely, sweet, kind human beings in there, and they don't know what the leadership is doing.
Hmm.
So, yeah, she came out. She's doing wonderful. She's got a life after the J-dubs, and she loves singing. It's a bit hard with her son. He's 7 now. You know, she would love to be in more production. She likes the arts. She likes painting. She likes singing. She likes doing voice acting. So she's having a whale of a time.
So your son is still a JW?
I don't know.
Hmm.
As far as I know, yeah, he is. I will never know unless he contacts me and says, "Dad, not a JW anymore."
But the
So
silence is very telling.
Oh yeah, I will never know if he gets married, possibly. I will never know if he has a child. I won't know that.
Because if you as an apostate, because you're an apostate to them, if he is following the rules and following Jehovah and the church leadership, he is supposed to effectively shun you. Is that fair to say?
Yep. And if he talks to me on unnecessary things, so they are allowed to talk. Say if, like, I ended up in hospital, I had an operation. He actually came and stayed for about 24 hours, which was great. You know, we never talked about the J-dub stuff. It was all to do with life. So that's permissible, but that's not always the case in some witness families. They go from extremes of being normal, just about, to being very controlled in what they are and aren't allowing their family to do. You know, so there's people out there that don't even know their mothers died. Don't even know the grandparents have died.
That's horrific. It really, I mean, I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but it makes your blood boil a little bit thinking about the fact that they're breaking up families intentionally, aggressively breaking up families over what we, now that we've escaped from this, these cults. You know, I would have called Jehovah's Witnesses a cult before, and now I acknowledge that what I was in is just as much a cult. I thought Jehovah's Witnesses was so weird. You know, why can't you all just get in line with traditional Christianity? And now I realize the irony of that. But once you escape the cults, you're like, this is just mythology. This is just, whether there was a guy at the beginning or not of this. They legendized and mythologized a story, some kind of apocalyptic preacher or zealot, political zealot or something. Whatever started this thing in the turn of the BC to AD, whatever started this thing, they mythologized the whole thing, and it's based on all these, number one, a lot of copies of other stories. And I haven't dove into the differences between like my Bible and the JW Bible. I know there's some differences, but just looking at some of the cores of it, a lot of it's copied not even from mythology in the sense of like where you'd say, well, this was the way they worshipped Mithras, so we're going to worship Jesus the same way. Like not that, but just literally copied from just literary devices, from literature, from Homer. I've been diving deep into that recently, learning that a lot of Luke and you have Luke and Acts in your Bibles, right? Where Luke and Acts is based heavily on Homer's Iliad and the Odyssey. Copying both structure and storylines and motifs and even entire phrases, and it's just and Euripides, Bacchae, Virgil, and lots of other things, endless things like that. But like, this thing is mythology. You're ruining families over mythology. Like, what's wrong with you guys?
I know, you look back on it now and all you've got to do is laugh, otherwise you go crazy. It's just diabolical, some of the things I now know the J-dubs believed, or they still do believe, and where they all started from. You just got to shake your head. It's just, you sit there and wonder why such bright people in that organization, like most organizations, they have some very fantastically bright people, and they're stuck in this environment where they're being spoon-fed this stuff, and they get like this, and they don't use their critical thinking. I was guilty of that. I think about the Ark story. I firmly believe that Noah's flood was true. And then after I started waking up, so I wrote my letter. It took me about 8.5 years to wake up from the time I wrote that letter until I woke up. And as I was going there, somebody said about the Ark and the flood period. Okay, so how did the koala get to Australia? They sleep for 18 hours. So from Australia to where the Ark was, just a minute, the food source isn't really anywhere else other than Australia. And then I go, just a minute, what about our tuatara? Looks like a little dinosaur. How the hell did that get there? And then all these other things started going. And I'm going, what? Did Noah swing by Australia and just go past New Zealand and pick up those two creatures so he could flip them on the ark and save them? And I go, just a minute, what about? And all these questions started coming into my head. And then I'm going, okay, so that subject there. Now, what if, and what about? I never learned the art of critical thinking at all. So when things came up here, I would look in their old publications and go, oh, yep, that seems logical. That's feasible. Then it wasn't. And I just go, and it's just so crazy to look on that 42 years of my life being part of that organization. No, I don't regret it totally, because they taught me so many things. They're brilliant teachers, like I said, in doing things, how to speak, how to present, how to organize, a whole heap of things that it benefits my life now. It's part of me, and I've really benefited from those sorts of things. But looking back on the beliefs that I had, I don't believe it now.
What was like the last few days like before you got out, and would you say that you were, as you were getting out and just truly waking up, so to speak, were you becoming an atheist, or were you just at that point saying, I mean, I don't think Jehovah's Witnesses have the truth, but maybe Catholics are right, or maybe the Jews are right, maybe Muslims? Like, were you starting to investigate other things, or did it just all fall apart to atheism, or how did that land for you?
Well, when I left, mentally, I was still a J-dub. My thinking was still J-dub. I just wanted out. So until I started waking up, and that was about 3.5 years ago, this up here was mentally a J-dub. So even though a J-dub believes and say they've gone, mentally, they haven't. They have not pulled this thing apart, opened it up and go, okay, so I believe that. Now, what's the story with that? Until they start breaking things down, you don't question. So I had a period of about 8 years where I still thought it was the true organization. So, like I said, it wasn't until about 3.5 years ago that I started questioning. I don't know what I am. All I know is I've got no time for religion. So, yeah, it's just one of those things where I know other people have had what you're talking about, but myself, no, I've never had that.
So you wouldn't necessarily call yourself an atheist necessarily at this point?
I have no idea.
Gotcha.
I just know that the Bible was put together by man. Catholic Church got hold of it, took out 14 books of it because it didn't fit their viewpoints. They changed it. Even what they call the Silver Sword, which is the Jehovah's Witness Bible, they've gone through and taken out at least 47 bits of the Bible, which are in most Bibles, because they don't believe it should be there. They've gone and added things which should be there, like Jehovah's name. And they freely admit in their own publications and their own videos that, one, they don't know what Jehovah's name really is because it's there, and that nobody really knows what the Bible has to say because nobody's got the original scrolls.
Yeah.
and yet we're meant to believe what they say in the Bible. And I never would have thought like that, because I truly believed what was there in front of us, whatever version of the New World Translation, because it's had so many different other changes. Um, totally different
Mm.
from the first one to the one they've got at the moment, the Silver Sword. It's just they're taking bits out, and I would never have believed that they were going to take bits out of God's holy word, the Bible. And
Mm.
yeah, it's just so many different questions that
And,
we need to critically think.
and yet God is not the God of confusion.
No, that's right.
Uh, it's crazy. Well, it's interesting to me, and I was talking with Sherry about this briefly. We didn't hammer on this point too much, but it's amazing. Even not just that part, which is that in of itself is very condemning of religion, because it's not just JWs. Every aspect of Christianity has done this.
Yep.
Where the Book of Revelation wasn't. It was rejected for centuries before
Mm-hmm.
they let Revelation stick in there. They had Enoch in there for a while. Jude was out for a while. And books went in and out. But what's fascinating to me is a lot of people don't realize beyond that, which again is a big issue, canonicity basically, but and the church councils and how that worked. But even like once you say, okay, well, what did the church councils narrow it down to eventually? Like if you say, I just want to
Mm.
kind of keep the blinders on and say, somehow God God said, these books are the ones that I eventually want. It did take you 4 centuries to get there, but my spirit was guiding you, and this is the book I eventually wanted. So there you have it. This is my plan. Here's your book. Well, number one, that idea is flawed, and this is a side note to what I'm about to say. But the Ethiopian church, for example, they never lost the Book of Enoch. The Ethiopian church is talking about millions of people, millions upon millions of Christians over the centuries. They have always considered Enoch part of the canon. Always, they've
Mm.
never lost
Mm.
it from day one. So like, where's the clarity of that? But then people don't realize, and this is the big point, was a lot of these books that they appear to have dropped off are like, okay, well, we don't consider Jubilees part of it. At least we, as I don't know if you did, but Jubilees isn't part of it. Maccabees isn't in it. Enoch's not in it. All these ideas, people don't realize that they actually are still in your Bible, because they're
Mm.
quoted over and over and over and
Yeah.
over and over with them. Like, so when the people wrote Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and Acts and all this, they weren't coming up with new creations. They were looking at these other books. They're looking at Jubilees. They're looking at Enoch. They're looking at
Yep.
the Qumran communities rule books and so forth. They're looking at Homer's Iliad and Odyssey and Virgil and Euripides, all these books, and Pythagoras. They're looking at all this stuff, and Plato certainly. They're looking at all these different sources, and they're copying out of it over and over. And so when you look at it, you say, okay, well, Enoch dropped off. No, it didn't. If you look in the canonical Protestant New Testament, there is at least 100 quotes from the book of Enoch within it. People think, oh, well, it's in Titus, maybe Second Peter. No, it's like 100 times in the whole, and that's just Enoch alone. We're not even talking about Jubilees or
It's
Maccabees.
amazing.
And like, people don't realize you don't even know what's in your own book. Even the church
Mm-hmm.
elders, whether you're
Oh,
JW elders or ours. I went to Bible college. I suspect if you told them that the book of Enoch is quoted 100 times in the Protestant New Testament, they would
yeah.
say garbage. That's not true. That is not
Yep.
accurate. I'm like, it's not that hard to find it. Go look it up. You can find the book of Enoch for free on the internet in 10 seconds. Start reading it. If you know your Bible,
Yep.
you'll see it. It'll pop. It's really easy to do. But
Yep.
it's amazing to me. I've said that to so many people over my interviews, not just Enoch, but talking about a lot of these different sources. And
Yep.
I
Yep.
haven't had one person, not one person yet, and this is it's so surprising to me. Not one person has said, you know what, you keep nailing on Enoch. What's your deal with Enoch? I'm
Mm.
gonna actually go read it now. You've said it in like every third interview. Enoch is quoted over and over
Yep.
and over. No one's come to me yet and said, you know what? I went and read Enoch. This is crazy. It is quoted 100 times in the New Testament. Like, nobody does it. No one's going to reading like, where's people reading Maccabees and Jubilees? Where are people going and reading? It's people saying, you know what? I went back to the Iliad and the Odyssey. You're right. It's all over the place. It's
Yep.
just crazy to me that people It's like you get to a point where you don't have a scope for the imagination, and
Yeah.
you can't imagine that it's anything other than the party line. Like, this is from God, it is inerrant, and it's His message to us. And any other explanation for it is garbage. Why do I need to even think about it? Why would I read the book of Enoch? I know God didn't include it. Enoch's irrelevant. I want God's word, not Enoch. And
Yep.
it's like there's no sense of saying. It's kind of like another parallel to me that's just shocking is like people can't imagine how this came about. So you look in the Old Testament and you see all these passages that talk about, Elohim, and then you talk about others that talk about Jehovah or Yahweh, and you're
Mhm.
like, people just, Christians assume by and large, okay, God's called Elohim here, He's called Yahweh or Jehovah here. Obviously, it's the same God because that's what we just know. So
Mhm.
let's merge them, and He's just using different names for Himself. It's like that could be the truth, but it could also be that there was a story about a god or a demigod named
Mhm.
Elohim or Elyon, and there was a story about a different demigod named Yahweh, and they merged them. And when you
Yep.
read and it says God and then it says Lord, the reason it says God and Lord is not because they're two names for the same God, it's because they're two different gods
Different.
that got
Yeah.
merged. And it's like, it's so hard for me to, now that I'm out, to be like, why wasn't it an option? Not to piece all this together, but just to say, yes, it could have happened the way I was taught, but it also could have happened a different way. This could have evolved
Mhm.
very
True.
differently. It's like it doesn't even cross your mind. It's like
Nope.
it's if you even were to theoretically have entertained those ideas, it's like, what kind of satanic stuff are you entertaining? Like, why would you do that to
Yeah.
yourself? Just focus
Well,
on
I
the
never knew
word.
about
Get
the
the
Book
word.
of Mormon.
Yeah.
Book of Enoch, I had no idea existed.
Hmm. Yeah.
And I did come across it. I'm not a great reader nowadays. I read too much of J-Dub stuff. I'm not interested in reading the Bible myself.
Yeah.
It doesn't go out of your memory, but yeah, it's just not something I'm interested in. And I found, thing about the J-Dubs, they go and say, okay, these are the rules because this is what the scriptures say. Okay, so if we look at the governing body, where do the scriptures talk about a governing body? And yet they make it out as such a big, high up there thing. And yet the scriptures don't talk about a governing body. So it's a man-made thing.
Hmm.
And you go, and then you go through all the other things. Okay, where does it say that you can shun your family? Oh, just a minute, it doesn't. And you just go through a whole lot of the belief structures that I had in my life for so long. And you go, okay, is it in the Bible? Oh, hang, no, it's not. And you move on. Oh, that one's not either. They're all man-made stuff to control their members. And yeah, it just put me right off anything. But like I say, I don't know what I am now.
Hmm.
Um, I had no idea, and I'm not too worried about it.
Yeah. And nor should you be. At
No,
least,
that's
I
right.
mean, the big point is you got out of a man-made mythological cult, and
Correct.
that's a great place to start. And
It is.
it's great too that you acknowledged, kind of to put it metaphorically, that this thing has roots in us. It's not just like you don't,
Yep.
like, if you're cutting off a tree, you can cut it off, but the roots are still there, and you have to
Mm-hmm.
still keep pulling up and say, how did this affect my worldview? And I love
Yeah,
that you're kind of doing that and thinking through all the ways that, you said, like, you were out, but you were still like a JW in your mind. It's
oh
true. I mean,
yeah,
it's the same thing for me as, not intentionally, but as a Christian, there's some ways in which you think that, like that, you can't help it. And I say it to my shame too, but there's occasionally a time when I'll remember some worship song, that'll come back to my
mm-hmm.
head, and I'll be like, do I want to hear that again? Like, would that? And I'm like, I don't think I do want to hear it, but there's a part of me that remembers, like, that song being, so
Yep,
helpful at the time. And I'm like,
yep.
let's just listen to it for the sake of old times. And, like, what does it feel like? And how do I approach it now? But I'm like, I want to be more disgusted by it than I should, than I am. And
Yeah,
I mean, I'm disgusted by a lot of it, but I feel like there's a part of it that needs to be more disgusted by it, because it's mind control. It's a
it
very
is.
sick system.
I know with the J-Dubs, when you talk about music, not so much the new songs, because I don't know how the hang they sing the new songs. but the older ones from what we would call the pink songbook and the brown songbook, they had some real tunes that you could really get fired in. And some of those that were as a Jehovah's Witness then or still are, and they remember those songs, it triggers some memories that these people don't want to have coming into their heads, and they can't get that song. They call it Kingdom Melodies in the JW world. They don't want those songs in their heads. They stay there for days.
Yeah.
And it takes them back to a place they don't want to go. So, yeah, it's just diabolical.
Yeah. Well, could I ask, we've touched on this topic a little bit, but could I maybe wrap up with two topics? One of them, the topic of childhood indoctrination.
Yep.
Obviously, you went through it. I went through it. We know people that went through it and still stuck in it. But when you look at that, just the whole idea of I want to focus it on the idea of autonomy. If you have a child and they're at say a family gathering, and your child doesn't want to be hugged by everybody, like I'm done being hugged. I want some space. Hopefully, as a parent, especially in these days, you would say, of course, if you don't want to hug, just tell people no. It's your body. No means no. You can say no to people. No hugs today. And that's perfectly acceptable. It's your body.
Absolutely. Yep.
And
absolutely.
that autonomy is something I think we all kind of get on board with more these days. But the idea of thought autonomy, like where someone has the ability to touch your thought life and your worldview and have their hands all over your worldview and say you have to believe just like us. And if you don't believe like us, there is penalties for the afterlife, and there's a lot of shunning that's going to happen today, versus just saying, I'll be glad to tell you what I believe, but you have the freedom and the power to decide for yourself. Like when you see people depriving kids of that, what, especially it's been that you've gone through it, what goes through your mind?
Well, it's normal. We were encouraged, this is what it is. This is how it is. This is what's going to happen. This is what you believe. And that's all you know. You don't know any different from that. You've got it in front of you. It's truth. You just go along with it.
Yeah.
So they are, every meeting they have, they are drip feeding the kids. And we're talking about some crazy subjects they indoctrinate the kids or speak about with the kids' presence. Like in their study version of the Watchtower magazine, they will talk about bedroom activities. So regardless of whether the kid is 1 to 13, 14, they will talk about oral sex, and it's not appropriate. They will talk about homophobia, that a man and a woman are the only way to be, and how dare you be friends with them? How dare you want to associate with them? And if people start telling you things that we're not telling you, that's lies. Stay away from it. And by the way, don't question. So most JDO kids will not question. I'm not saying all, because some do. Yeah. And they can see right through it. But myself, I never question anything. I just went along for the ride. I don't remember my kids really questioning anything. They just went along with it. I know my daughter admitted later on she got baptized because of her mother. And because she wanted to do, they used to do dramas at the district convention. And that was the only reason she wanted to get baptized, so that she could do these things. But a kid, I'll ask you this, when were you old enough to understand what you wanted in life?
I mean, I guess late teens in terms of being able to pull things apart. But I know that for me, I was so indoctrinated with this stuff, and I was like you. I just went with it.
Yeah.
Not like passively, but actively. I was an apologist for it. I was passionately on fire. It's hard to say because when you say like, what did you really want? I wanted God. I wanted the gospel. I wanted the kingdom. And I couldn't pull that. I was inseparable from God, the gospel, and the kingdom till I was 43 years old.
Yep. So these JW kids, like I know for myself, I thought it was the right thing I needed to do. I can't think of any other reason. I just thought, right, I'm in this religion. It's true. Now, what they don't tell the kids. So my daughter got baptized at 12. When you're 12, you know nothing. And yet these kids are getting baptized, even though they say they don't do child baptism, but 6 years old is a child. They know nothing. So if a child has been for the first 12, 13, 14, 15 years of life, and that's all they've known, they've got baptized, well, that's signing a contract for the rest of their life. So this indoctrination affects them, right? This is what I've got to do. If I don't do this, Jehovah's going to hate me and I'm going to be useless. And they get to teenage years, they explore, which is normal. They go and do things which other kids are doing. If they get disfellowship, because there's a big if, it's just a matter of when. If they do something wrong, they have basically gone. They will be removed. The indoctrination then, like you said before, splits the families up. And unfortunately, in the J-Dubs, they have a very high suicide rate.
I didn't know
because
that.
those kids have lost their support system. No more talking to grandma, granddad. No talking to auntie and uncle. No talking to the brother and sister. No talking to the parents. They're out in their, they kicked out of the house. Say if a kid was doing something wrong, the parents are encouraged to remove them from the house and put them out.
What's the earliest age they can kick them out like that?
Oh, they don't care. They'll kick them out when they're 12, 13, 14.
Because
I know some, they're
obedient.
not believing, they're not being obedient, they're not following. And so these kids who know nothing, even legally here in New Zealand, you can't sign a document till you're 18. And there are clauses that you can get out of those contracts. J-Dubs, forget that. The indoctrination is you are a J-Dub for life, and your loyalty belongs to Jehovah, and don't worry about yourself. You're not there to look after yourself, you're there to serve Jehovah. And that indoctrination goes right through their lives. I can think of some of the things that not that long ago, up here, I was still a J-Dub with their thinking. And you've just got to pull these things out. But the problem is, when you're in that organization, the kids here, you go to the elders for help. One, the elders aren't trained. And two, okay, so you're not in that organization. Where are the elders? Plus, they've been told don't go to therapy more often than not. The elders are there to help with all sorts of things.
So they set themselves up as the really the only source of truth and support and guidance and light in your life. And then if you don't fall in line, they basically say, get out. So you have no other support system left.
All gone. Hopefully, and I would encourage, if anybody knows any J-Dubs, the kids are going through them, please search on the net. There are wonderful former Jehovah's Witnesses that will care for you unconditionally, even if you feel like you're gay or transgender or one of the, I can never remember all the letters, LPGQ society. There are groups out there that will help them. So if you know friends who are J-Dubs, don't confront them, just support them. And if the kids get pushed out of home, go grab them, hug them, take them with you.
Well, you're getting on the exact issue I was going to ask to be my second part of my wrap up is healing, recovery, reclaiming your identity, getting help. Obviously, admitting that we need, a community, a new community, so to speak. It feels like your community of the church was our life for so long, and then once we're out, it's like what's left, and it feels like you're starting over. It feels very scary, very frightening. Even if you've got a spouse, like with the D'Souza's, where you just the luck of the draw. You got very, very lucky that you have a support person right there who's going to walk with you. But whether you've got that or you're all alone, there's still going to be so much upheaval, so much questioning, especially with all the people trying to say you got to bow your knee to Jehovah, you got to repent, come back to the truth, and other people obviously being very condemning of you, saying, you're
Yep.
a traitor. You shouldn't have looked at those apostate websites. You shouldn't be talking to these people. You have turned, you have shipwrecked your life. You're an
Oh, yep.
apostate. Basically, like this conversation is your last chance. Turn to Jesus now, or I'm walking away for life. I'm not talking to you again because you have basically sold out to the devil. So many bizarre and weird and horrific messages being sent. How do people going through this, like, what would you say would be just your best starting point for people's, where they're on the edge, where it is so painful, and they know that number one, they need to heal, but it's going to be a long journey. Number two, they need to reclaim their identity. They've always been wrapped up in Jehovah, and all of a sudden they realize Jehovah's mythology, he's not real. I have an identity, but I don't even know how to start reclaiming it, to know, who am I? Who am I without this pretend God? How would you encourage people to just kind of take the first few basic steps in that? And maybe to bring in your own story, how did you begin to
Yep.
heal and reclaim your identity?
It's funny because you get out of the J-dubs, you've been told don't search the internet. You've been told don't go to therapy. They're wicked. They'll turn you against Jehovah. Jehovah's your friend. Go back to him. And for decades, there's been many, many, many people that have not known about doing a Google search, Jehovah's Witness. If there was somebody that anybody who might be watching this who knows the kids, or you might be one of those kids or young adults, or even a grown, mature person that's never thought about doing a search for Jehovah's Witnesses, you're not alone. We're here. We're here to help you. We know it's hard. And so many people struggle. It's heart-wrenching to think about what they're going through. And it's really, really traumatic. I've been out for a while. But the stories you hear and what they're going through, it's not fair. It's not what life should be like. There's so much support out there. Do a search for ex-Jehovah's Witness help. Like, we run a group. I'm part of the admin team called Life After Jehovah's Witnesses, designed specifically to help former Jehovah's Witnesses to not focus on what they've left, because my view is there's no point in looking at the rear vision mirror, this little tiny thing behind you that's in the past. The steps that you've got to take your off this little mirror and look forward can be so hard. There's so many groups out there that are loving, that are caring. They won't leave you alone. Amazing people, like in our group, we do a live stream for the Life After JW group, and this guy here, he was an elder too. He went through everything. We had him on a live stream. You should hear him sing. Absolutely fantastic. And if you ever want to look at that video of the live stream, we've got a YouTube group called YouTube channel, Life After Jehovah's Witnesses. The little profile pictures, a whole little smiley faces, those yellow balls with smiley faces. But yeah, YouTube's a good place. Google's a good place. Facebook is a good place to look out at everything. Most of our contact details, whether it's the YouTube, whether it's Facebook, or our webpage, lifeafterjdub.org, it's all got that, because we firmly believe that there is life after JW. You may not know what steps to take, but we can support. We can be at your side. We can help you. Yes, you've got to make the choices. That indoctrination, to be honest, is going to be there for the rest of your life. But guess what? You can dull those triggers. Those triggers will get less and less and less, and then you'll be able to read, start doing the real life. J-dubs talk about this thing, the real life, and they talk about paradise. We find out the real life is not that. It's happy. It's fun. It's all the good things that you would have expected when you were a childhood to learn about. In our childhood, forget it. We didn't learn about all those things. So regardless of where you are from, it doesn't matter which religion either, because there's so many support groups out there for them all to help us get the indoctrination that we've had drip fed us all those years, get out of our heads, to slowly work on that. Yeah, it's going to be a slow process, but you can do it. There's something to aim for.
Yeah.
And you'll have this on your face more often than not. I'm not saying we're not going to have problems, because we all do, but not as many as when we were in, whether it's the J-dubs, whether it was any other religion. It's just what it is.
Yeah.
Life is out there to be enjoyed.
Yeah, absolutely. And what you reminded me too with the Life After JW's group, just the idea of getting support in the Recovering from Religion group. I'll put the link for your Facebook group, as well as for
Cool.
lifeafterjw.org, as well as the Recovering from Religion link right beneath our video. But just there are people that they're ready to help. And I know when I first got out, I called the Recovering from Religion line. I don't remember how I came across them, but I called them, I think, at least twice, and they're not there to tell you what to believe or what not to believe. They're just there to be a listening ear and to tell you it's going to be okay. And sometimes that's the most important thing. Is just, it feels like it's so dark and so weird at first. Like, it's just so weird. Like what is this? Like, what is life now? Like you said, when you with your daughter, like, my structure is gone. Like, what's left? And it feels like you are on a sinking boat, or on it's just some kind of wobbly foundation, and you just don't know what to expect. You're like, am I going to sink? Am I going can I make it through this? And it's so helpful to have someone come along who's been through that. Excuse me, someone who's been through that already, and just to say, take this slow, don't try to rush this process. If it hurts, let it hurt. It's supposed to hurt. You are escaping a cult, but there is a beautiful life waiting for you, and it's going to be okay. Every day gets a little bit better. And I know for me, I was just the luck of the draw, but for me, my process for me was, I took about 18 months to just dive deep into the origins of Christianity and Judaism and the Bible and candidacy. And I wasn't thinking I was going to be deconverting, and I would have said that's crazy. There's deconversion is not an option. That's just ridiculous. But finally, right here in front of this computer, almost 2 years ago, end of September of 2019, it just hit me within an hour. I mean, within an hour, I was out. It was like someone just plugged me in, and it just all came flooding, and I was done. I was literally done in an hour. And for me personally, even though I felt very lost and very like, where do I go now? I was like, I feel like I kind of won the lottery. Like, I thought, for people that are, in my, having gone through my particular kind of journey, where you grew up very indoctrinated and you weren't just passive, you loved it. They said, go read your Bible for 15 minutes, and you read it for 4 hours because you love Jesus. They said, go do Bible studies, and instead you wrote Bible study manuals. They said, read your Bible, and instead you made your own copy of it. Just all this stuff. I was in it to win it. And I just thought to myself, I think most people, this is an assumption, but I think most people who were in it as deep as I was, probably the chance of them leaving is fairly slim. At least it felt slim to me, because it just feels so real to you. It's like you feel like you might as well say your own parents or your own spouse isn't real. Like, of course they're real. I can see them. And it just felt so real that the idea of getting out felt so unlikely, that to get out and to think I got out, it felt like I won the lottery. Yes, this is weird, but I won the lottery. And then you got all kinds of things, like you mentioned, Noah's Ark, evolution, the morality. Where does morality come from? Why is there something rather than nothing? All these questions, you now have the opportunity to start to investigate them and answer them But you may not have answers. You may never have answers to some of them, but at least you know where the answers aren't. You know that it's
Yep.
not a mythology.
Yep.
The reason that there's something rather than nothing, maybe we won't know the best answer for that in our lifetime, but I know it's not in Zeus. I know it's not in Thor. I know it's not in Ra. I know it's not in Jesus. Like this, at least we know the answers, and it just frees you to like I like to say, look up at the stars at night and think,
Hmm.
what a beautiful galaxy we have, and not to think this was made by some god who likes to cut off the end of little boys' penises. Like, come on, like you get rid of the weird, bizarre, garbagey stuff and start to open your eyes for the first time. And
Yeah.
once you do it too, it's amazing. I think you kind of alluded to this a couple times, but it's this idea of what in the world was I thinking? Like, what,
Hmm.
my book started with a talking snake and went on to a talking donkey to the sea parting to bread falling from heaven, all kind, sun standing still for a day, endless bizarre stuff. And you're like, why couldn't I see this was so
Hmm.
mythological? But once you do, you're like, as painful as it is my point is, as painful as it is, you're like, I am so glad I'm out. Like,
Yep.
yes, I'll do the painful work. Yes, I'll go get start a new community. Yes, I'll just find new groups. But I'm just so glad I didn't go to the very end of my life and get to the last day and think, and be still in the midst of a huge, huge lie.
Hmm.
What a great thing to have at least some time left in my life to live it for real, as
Yeah.
opposed to how somebody 2,000 years ago dictated we should live it.
Yep.
Just
Definitely.
Well, I know I asked a lot of questions and we went through a lot of your story, but is there anything I didn't touch on yet that you wanted to add before we wrap up?
All I'd say is, yeah, we've talked about a lot of things, but unfortunately, the J-dubs, they're sitting in their Zoom meetings. They're going, I wish I could get away, but I've got nobody to go to. You're not alone.
Hmm.
You don't have to sit through that Zoom meeting to be able to listen to the more indoctrination. You do have the opportunity to go and have a life. They only are just 8 men that are telling their 8.5 million followers their version of what they think. Do research, ask questions, come and join us. Come to the Life After group or any of the other groups and get a real life and be happy, because I'm so much more happier now when I look back than, it's amazing the life that is out there. That's all I'd like to conclude on.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. Yeah, it's so true.
Yeah.
There is a new life that's waiting, and it's ironic. We as Christians, as Protestants at least, would have talked about being born again and the scales falling from your eyes.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
it's amazing. But I would use the same metaphors for
Yep.
deconversion. Like, you realize you are starting a second life. You're starting your
Yeah.
real life, your
Yep.
one life. That you have, not this million zillion billion year life, but your one life. Live it to the best you can, because this is all you have. And as sad as it is compared, if you wanted to live, for all eternity, yeah, it's sad to think that the heaven I was promised is not real. That's heartbreaking for a while, but
Mm.
once you get past, you're like, I would have rather known the truth than have lived a lie. At least
Yeah.
me personally, I don't want to be plugged back into the matrix and
And
live a
nope.
pretend life. I want to know the truth. I want to get out of Plato's cave and stop looking at the shadows. Even if it's heartbreaking, I want the truth, and I want people to stop being able to be the puppet masters of my life and control my thoughts. I want to be able to be free to investigate them without any fear of condemnation or shunning. I will pick my path, and if people don't agree, then that's fine. We can be friends without people
That's
threatening and
right.
saying you're going to burn in hell or be annihilated or lose out on the paradise. And yeah, it's just it's such a wonderful, wonderful thing to have escaped. And it's scary when you're in the first few days and weeks of it, but it does get a lot better.
Definitely.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. This has been awesome. I'm so glad we got a chance to touch base. I'd love to do it again sometime. And I've been brainstorming some ideas for maybe even a bigger group Zoom with a few of you all in that part of the world at some point. But we've been talking again with Shayne Mechen. Shayne, thank you so much for sharing your story, your vulnerability, your passion for helping people, your love for the truth. It shines through. Thank you so much for doing this.
Well, thanks for having us on and the opportunity to educate a little bit more about those J-dubs and the fairy tales I keep telling.
Absolutely. Well, let's do it again sometime. I look forward to the next time.
Thanks, Matt.
Thanks, Shayne.